Okay, right. Hello, folks. So I am on a bit of a roll at the minute, and I thought I would get on with recording what will be the first video in a little series that I'm doing. So in my last video, I just mentioned about how I'm currently researching the invasion threats and how these were perceived by the Home Forces. And initially, I was going to do this as one big long video, and now I've started researching it. If I did that, it's going to be like a 5 hour long video or something stupid. So what I'm going to do is break it down into little bits and pieces and go from there. So yeah, as I say, this is going to be the first video looking at the invasion threats against the UK during the Second World War. In particular, focusing on the invasion threats and preparations to counter invasion prepared by the Home Forces. This is going to include, summaries of the Home Forces assessments of the invasion threats, which is something that's, as far as I'm aware, not been done before. Mm. So I was up at, I couldn't, well, I woke up at 3 o'clock this morning and I couldn't sleep. I couldn't get this out of my head, so I got up and wrote this first video within like an hour and a half of, at 3 in the morning. And yeah, I'm going to be working with the script with this one because there's a fair bit of information that I want to get out and I want to do it properly. So just a bit of an introduction. The thing that really surprises me about the invasion threat during the Second World War is that it's always, from my perspective at least, or as far as I'm aware, always assessed from the German perspective and very rarely from the perspective of the Home Forces. The Home Forces being, as I'm sure you're aware now, the military organisation, the British and Commonwealth forces responsible for planning and implementing the defence of the UK. So, by only assessing the invasion threat from the Germans' perspective, this causes many issues. The first being that you never get to actually see the reaction to the invasion threat as it was from the Home Forces. And secondly, the units deployed in the UK to defend it are rarely considered, other than, the old tropes of poorly armed old men and young boys of the LDV, later the Home Guard, and again, which hopefully my content is showing you that this is now an ahistorical trope and something that should be largely dismissed. But yeah, unfortunately, but by focusing solely on the Germans, you don't get the kind of like the opposite side of things and the preparations that were made to defend the UK. So first things first, I hadn't intended to actually make a video looking solely at the German plans of invasion. I was just going to do this as a little aside, and then when I started looking into this, I thought actually this needs a bit more of attention to kind of set the context for which my future videos will kind of follow on from. So I also want to say as well that I'm by no means an expert or authority on German preparations, and to be perfectly honest, I've got next to no interest in what the German military of the Second World War were up to. It's really not my primary focus at all. I'm only really interested in the Home Forces and the specific area of history. So yeah, I'm by no means an authority on the German military at all. Yeah, I'm much more interested in the Home Forces, and this is where my specialism and knowledge and expertise lie, as hopefully you'll see. So if you do have any questions at the end of this video, specifically about the German military, the Nazis, whatever, I'm very unlikely to be able to answer them because I haven't got a knowledge of this stuff, apart from what I've found through the research for this video, and my very limited prior experience of looking into the German invasion plans. But what I will do throughout this video is point you in the direction of the primary sources that I've used to prepare this video. So yeah, you would not believe how long I've been meaning to do something on this. I was initially going to do this as a Twitter thread years ago, and because I'm not a big fan of writing, I never got around to it and just constantly put it off. And nowadays, given that I write for a living, the last thing I want to be doing is sitting down and writing shed loads of stuff, in my spare time. Anyway, onto the primary sources. So, I personally always like to consult primary sources to make my content and assess the history of the invasion period. Using secondary sources is fine to an extent, but relying on them heavily for your research, I don't find that particularly useful. So yeah, in terms of relying on primary sources, this is no different for this video. I am aware of the issues surrounding using secondary sources and how this can skew historical interpretations. And as a result, I always like to get right to the bottom of the issue and look at the original documents where possible. So in the research for this video, I have, where possible, consulted original documents to make my assessment and present the data I have found. Many of these documents have been sourced from a really bloody good, I nearly swore then, really good website called GermanDocsInRussia.org. This entire website is in Russian and German, but you can use Google Chrome to easily translate that. And this provides digitized copies of a vast range of German military documents, including those related to the plans for invasion of the UK. A problem is with this is that the documents themselves are all in German, and I couldn't find an easy way to translate these quickly. And also, I don't want to go, I can see myself, if I do translate these, I'm going to go off on a tangent and end up going overboard in terms of looking at the vast amount of detail within these documents, which is something I don't want to do. I want to focus and stay focused on the home forces. So I do speak a bit of German, but my German is very poor, which is quite surprising as someone who bloody was born in Germany and lived there for 3 years, thanks to my dad being in the army. My parents speaking a bit of German, and I was taught German at high school as well in this country, which was a bit of a piss take. But anyway, so as such, I haven't been able to consult and read the in-depth documents that make up the plans for the various invasion operations. So I've focused solely on the visual records, so primarily maps, which are relatively easy for me to translate and get an idea of what's going on, and also act as a visual cue for me, which I can process much easier than trying to read reams and reams and reams of documents in a foreign language that I don't 100% understand. And I think for this video, consulting primarily the maps has been more than adequate for what this video aims to achieve, and this isn't going to be a deep dive into German preparations for invasion. The aim of this video is to summarise the German invasion plans, put the well-known invasion plan into context, the one that everyone knows about, which is, putting it into context is rarely done as far as I'm aware, but like I say, I'm by no means an expert on this, and I don't really do much research into the German side of things. That might be wrong, but who cares? So what I want to do more than anything is set the scene for my future videos, which will look at how the home forces reacted to the invasion in terms of their defensive plans, as well as present the invasion threat as they perceived it based on the intelligence they gathered and the assessments they made based on that intel. As I go through the presentation, I'll provide the file names for the documents I've consulted within the images, but I'm going to leave it up to you to find them via GermanDocsInRussia.org. If you want to look them up, I'm not going to hold your hand on this. I always find that it's much more productive. Instead of, babysitting people, it's much easier for me to give you the source of information and let you find them themselves. Otherwise, you don't learn anything. So finding this information has taken me a lot of time, which is something rarely considered, especially by those who are quite happy online to just copy and paste other people's information, and make themselves look like a bit of an expert. So, so just so you are, if you like doing a bit of plagiarism and using that to try and look clever online, just consider that if you're doing that, you're ripping off a vast amount of research and time that people have put into doing the research for you, and it's not on. Anyway, it's also worth me saying here from my experience, whenever I mention the Home Forces plans to counter invasion, the Home Forces are often criticised, or these plans are dismissed along the lines of the Germans wouldn't have done that, etc., etc. And ultimately, such dismissal is completely irrelevant. So whether or not you think the Germans were going to actually invade or not is irrelevant. If you are trying to assess what the Home Forces were doing, their plans that they put into place and their assessments based on the intelligence that they had are what happened historically. So whether or not you think the invasion was going to happen or not is completely irrelevant to this. So it doesn't matter if you think the Germans weren't going to do what the Home Forces thought they were going to do. What I'm trying to present here is the reaction to the threat of invasion as it was from the Home Forces, which again is something that's easily dismissed but rarely actually considered. So making this video and highlighting the German plans for invasion at the start will come in particularly useful later on, as you'll see in my future videos, for those of you that want to just dismiss this and say, oh, the Germans wouldn't have sailed from northern Germany, blah 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 blah. Anyway, as I've said already, I'm going to highlight and post links to my sources. Well, not all the sources of information. I'm going to post a link to this website in the description. And again, I encourage you to consult them for further information. Also, if any of my viewers do speak German, I'd be very, very interested in having a chat, because I want to brush up on my German, but also to look into getting these documents translated into English as part of future research. So, with all that ball out of the way, let's get going into the main part of the presentation. I don't know how long this is going to last. Who knows? I might go on forever. But yeah, hopefully this will prove useful to you all. So let's start with Unternehmen Seelöwe, or Operation Sealion, the one that everyone seems to know about. So yeah, everyone knows about Sealion. It's the thing that gets, excuse me, in terms of the invasion threat, it's where everyone seems to focus on. But as you'll see in this video, Operation Sealion was just one invasion plan. And also, if the invasion was to take place, this was just one plan of two that were to actually be undertaken. Personally, Sealion's been done to death, so I'm not going to go into too much detail in this. I'm sure you can find information about this elsewhere because, bugger me, it's boring. And other people have covered it and probably covered it in much better detail than I can. So I'm not going to focus on this a lot. But a couple of things that I want to make clear is that Sealion wasn't, as I've already said, the only plan for invasion, and it also wasn't the only planned operation that would have taken place if the invasion came. Obviously now we know it never did come. As a basic overview, Sealion would have seen 4 army groups landed on the south coast of England, supported by 2 divisions of paratroopers, who would have dropped kind of almost on the flanks of the invasion beaches. There was also the 5th Army, poised to launch an additional attack from Cherbourg into Dorset if required. Sorry, let me just go to the next slide. Here we go, that's better. So, it was quite a big operation by the looks of it. When you look at the documents, it was surprising how much planning the Germans put into it, especially when the preparations for invasion are often dismissed as never been taken seriously. You know, that's not necessarily true. The divisions of the main army groups would have landed on a total of 4 outlying beaches, with another beach earmarked, but apparently not used, so Beach A, which was around Ramsgate. Can't find anything in the maps that shows that troops would have been landed there, but it was earmarked as a potential landing beach. After the landing, the army groups and their divisions would have consolidated the beachhead as you'd expect, and they would have aimed to capture a phase line of initial objectives indicated by this big red line here, just south of London, before pushing further north and encircling London as they went, and then consolidating further to the north of London along this additional phase line here. A couple of things that have stood out to me or caught my attention while I've been looking into the maps related to this is first that, as I've always mentioned, Sealion is always presented solely from the German perspective, and when you look at a map like this, you never see the home forces. All the maps that I could find as secondary sources there was not a single one which showed where the divisions of the home forces were within this invasion area, which is just absolutely mad. So yeah, you never see the home forces plotted onto the same map as this. And this gives the impression that, you know, for people just taking a cursory glance, this gives the impression that the home forces, there were no home forces deployed there, and kind of feeds into this home guard mythology. So by not clarifying which units of the regular and territorial armies and the Commonwealth and Free Forces were there within the German invasion area, you're getting this very skewed view that there were pretty much no preparation. I'm going to post a link to this, but as always, I recommend checking out my resources on the UK Second World War Heritage website, in particular the Home Forces resources, to get an idea of which units in July 1940 were in this invasion area. And this will give you a better idea of what was going on in terms of the units that would have opposed the German Operation Sealion. What's also interesting as well is that when you go through the German documents for Sealion, there are actually several maps which show their assessment of which units of the Home Forces were in this area as well. So they were fully aware of what they might have come up against. And this, like I say, it's often ignored, and I don't get it. Anyway, with Sealion out of the way, let's take a look at what you generally don't see in terms of the wider context. Right. Unternehmen Herst Riser, Operation Sealion's Forgotten Cousin. So I've been particularly fascinated with Herst Riser, or Autumn Journey, for a very, very long time. So in English, this is Operation Autumn Journey, but because that's a bit of a pain in the backside for me to say, I prefer to say Herst Riser, so just bear with me on that. So Herst Riser gets very, very little attention, which is absolutely bizarre, given that this was like the supporting element of Operation Sealion. Yeah, so given its rarely mentioned and chronically under-researched, yeah, it's bizarre, but this operation was largely a diversionary raid, but would have actually seen the enemy landing in England, on the east coast of England and Scotland, as we'll see in a bit. So, yeah, as I've said, Operation Herst Riser was a deception plan that would have accompanied Operation Sealion and the later Shark, which we'll look into this later. And the aim of this operation was kind of twofold. It was to distract the home forces and seed panic, and also there was an additional element to draw the Royal Navy away from the North Sea and the Channel. And obviously away from the south coast, from the actual invasion of the south coast under Sealion and later Shark. Um, and why this is never mentioned is beyond me, because this is vitally important to our understanding of the German preparations for invasion and what would have happened if the Germans had made landfall. Um, yeah, I don't get why this is chronically ignored, as it hinders vital interpretation. So, just so you're aware, I'm going to go into Herst Riser in a bit more detail because it is largely uh, largely ignored. Um, so, let's start with the beginning of Herst Riser. So Herst Riser would have started 5 to 6 days before S Day. S Day being the day that Sealion would have commenced. Herst Riser's first act would have seen German battleships Admiral Hipper and Admiral Scheer set sail into the North Sea, where they would set up essentially an offensive patrol between the Faroes and Iceland. The aim of this was to draw the Royal Navy home fleet out Scapa Flow up towards the northeast, well out the way of what was going to happen on the south coast. And there was also the aim of further drawing the Northern Patrol away from their patrol route between the Shetlands and Norway, essentially to divert away from what was going to be kind of the second act of Unternehmen Herbstreise. Apparently, according to Wikipedia, so when I've had a look at this, because I speak very poor German, I've been unable to translate the documents associated with this, and as a result I've had to rely on secondary sources, in particular Wikipedia, which I apologise for. I'm fully aware it's not not a reliable source of information, but here's what I found. So here's the link, yeah, if you want to check this out. So according to Wikipedia, at some point, Admiral Scheer would continue out into the Atlantic, where he would engage merchant shipping, further drawing the Royal Navy away from the Channel and the North Sea. Like I say, I cannot corroborate this with the period documents. I did find a secondary source, which is in German, which is this website, wrb-stuttgart.de, which does provide a bit more information on this. But like I say, I haven't been able to corroborate this with the primary source, so if you are happy to do that, please let me know. So why this is in itself as a prelude to Herst Riser and Sealion is this operation is rarely mentioned, or this part of it, which would have taken place almost a week before S Day, is rarely mentioned, is absolutely beyond me, because this clearly shows that the Germans were fully aware of the role of the Royal Navy in terms of interfering with Operation Sealion, and it shows that the Germans made a concerted effort to distract and draw the Royal Navy away from the invasion areas. Obviously, I can't say how effective this would have been because it never actually bloody happened, but surely this would have potentially delayed the Royal Navy in intercepting the invasion forces and giving a bit of respite for the invasion forces, excuse me, landing on the south coast of England. So after this, we then come to the actual invasion fleet of Herst Riser. Oh yeah, so also an additional source has been the CIA, the American, despotic regime that likes to do various nasty things around the globe. Wink, wink. This report on their website is worth taking a look, and this also kind of gave a bit of insight into the role of Hipper and Scheer. And again, this is another secondary source, and I'm not 100% sure where they got this information from, but worth checking this out if you want to take a closer look and have a source of information that's in English. So we then come to the actual invasion fleet. So again, the sources I've found are relatively conflicting, including the CIA's website and these two websites, including Wikipedia, as to what the role of these convoys were in terms of Operation Unternehmen Herst Riser. So it's not particularly clear whether these were just purely distraction. Some sources mention that, in particular the CIA source, that the invasion fleets under Herst Riser would return to port if they came up against a superior Royal Navy force in the North Sea. or if the force was inferior, then they would carry on. It's not abundantly clear. This is really quite confusing, so I can't corroborate what would have actually happened, obviously because I don't speak German particularly well. But the maps give the primary source maps give a very, very different interpretation of this. So yeah, initially we have 3 convoys setting out for Denmark and Norway, which is something you need to remember for my later videos, because this threat is, by and large, I've had this when I posted about this. It's been completely, kiboshed, and people say, "Oh, it would have never happened. They'd have never been able to sail from these ports in Norway and Denmark." Well, it's interesting that because the Germans clearly thought otherwise. And then there was also Kreuzgruppe, which I'm not 100% sure what this was. I think that this was more than likely a support group of the German Royal Navy, which would have provided additional protection to the convoys. And then you have Convoy 4, which was set out from ports in northern Germany, potentially as distraction. And it appears from the source I could find that this would have turned around and gone back. Not 100% sure on this, but convoys 1, 2, and 3 are particularly interesting when we come and look at the maps I've been able to source. So it's worth noting that the convoys would have set sail at S-Day -2, so this is 2 days before Operation Sealion would have taken place. Would have seen, like I say, convoys set sail from primarily Norway, potentially Denmark, and ports in northern Germany. Again, this is kind of corroborated by the source that I found from the CIA website. But again, this is where the the confusion kind of sets in, because, as it says here, if they were attacked by inferior strength, then, it doesn't corroborate what was going to happen if the force that attacked them was inferior. And obviously it corroborates it kind of gives an idea of what would have happened if the Royal Navy force that attacked this fleet, if it came, was superior, that they'd all bugger off and scarper back to Norway and elsewhere. But like I say, it doesn't make it clear what would have happened in terms of the invasion forces that were to be landed as outlined within the map. So yeah, it's all a bit confusing. I apologise for this. So yeah, as I've already said, 4 convoys would set sail, 2 turn back, and then you had a Kreuzgruppe, which would probably add additional protection, and 3 of the convoys would have made landfall on the English and Scottish east coast. So let's have a look at this. So the 3 convoys were to transport the 69th, 163rd, and the 214th Infantry Divisions of the German Army to land in an area between, I think it's Dunbar and Berwick. Other sources I've seen say that they would have landed between Edinburgh and Newcastle. I found no evidence of this. The maps that I found which outline this plan show this very specific area where these divisions would have landed. So we have 3 divisions landing on the English and Scottish coast 2 days before Sealion. The things that really stood out to me with this was how much effort went into planning this landing. So there are maps within the source quoted here that show where each ship of the convoy would have laid anchor and where the supporting ships would have been in relation to the coast and things like that. Vast amount of planning went into this. And again, if this wasn't taken seriously, I doubt this level of planning would have gone into this. So from my perspective, this is something that was taken abundantly seriously by the Germans. You also have things like the divisional boundaries laid out in detail, which each of these divisions would have operated within. You've got the landing beaches, also pointed out, as we'll look at later. Choke points and river crossings also recceed in detail as well via the maps. And this is something which is vitally overlooked, but indicates to me how seriously this operation was in terms of planning and when it would have been undertaken. So what have we got next? I can't quite remember. I'm starting to forget what slides I've got next. Okay. So these divisions, after they'd been landed and consolidated their beachheads, as indicated by these red lines, would have then pushed inland towards the direction of Edinburgh. But the maps show that they would have stopped short of Edinburgh. So what we have here is 3 divisions landed in this very specific area, and I'm fairly convinced the aim of this was to draw the home forces to the northeast towards Scotland and the northern extent of England, taking units away from the south coast and possibly as well, leading the GHQ reserve, which was deployed in the area of Northampton to counterattack the east and south coast, potentially leading them up north as well, and seeing them deployed and out the way before the invasion threat, before the invasion hit the south coast. But this is purely speculation on my part. Can't confirm this at the minute. But you can clearly see here that part of this invasion, diversionary invasion, was to land divisions and have these divisions push inland, with a potential, a provisional push towards, I can't remember where that is now. My brain's gone. Anyway, a secondary division, secondary raid or push inland towards this part of the coastline as well. So yeah, I find this really interesting. These would have stopped short of Edinburgh. So my assumption is, I've seen it mentioned elsewhere that these divisions were to fall back and re-embark on the ships and, you know, go away as soon as Sealion took place, but I can't corroborate that. What's also worth noting as well is that Herst Riser would have been also accompanied by a radio deception scheme as well. So similar to what we see in the build-up to D-Day, the Germans would have put radio messages out to try and deceive the home force as well. So as you can see from this, I'm really, really interested in Herst Riser, and if anyone could translate these documents that are on the website, I'd be massively interested in that. And just to also show as well, so these are the bridges, ferries and fording points of the various rivers that were wrecked. You've also got harbours that were pre-wrecked, large harbours, landing places as well, which were kind of like a key part outlined on the maps. So clearly there was some form of reconnaissance, and I still can't spell reconnaissance, of the various defensive landscape features that the divisions landed in this area would have had to take to hold the beachheads and ensure their potential retreat back to the coast so they could re-embark. But again, this is just based on my initial kind of look at Herst Riser, and it's something that needs a lot more attention in terms of helping us better understand the Germans' preparations for invasion. So, key thing here, that's Sealion and Herst Riser out of the way. Yeah, if you can translate the documents, let me know, because I'm really keen on this. But something that also goes on acknowledged is that Sealion was only in I couldn't think of the word earlier and I can't think of it now, and it's really annoying me. But Sealion was only in operation to be used during 1940. Obviously, we know the invasion didn't come in 1940. And coming into 1941, the Germans still had plans for invasion, but these weren't under Operation Sealion. So this is where we see Unternehmen Haifisch, which is Operation Shark, which is I'll be using because it's much easier to say. And this was essentially a scaled back version of Sealion, which would have been used in 1941. So as far as I'm aware, this would have been undertaken alongside Herst Riser. So Herst Riser continued, as far as I'm aware, and remained relatively unchanged into 1941. And the aim of this was still to draw the home force of the Royal Navy away from the south coast of England. So Operation Shark would have been scaled back in comparison to Sealion, and would have seen 6 infantry divisions and 2 Gebirgsjäger divisions, which are mountain troops, landed on the south coast of England in this given area here. So yeah, this is quite a lot less planned than Sealion, as far as I'm aware. I'm not 100% sure on the objectives of Shark, whether these were the same as Herst Riser or, and I'm assuming the push inland was similar to that of Sealion. Sorry, Sealion I meant to say there. But on a much smaller scale. I can't confirm that. But this is something to be aware of, is that Sealion wouldn't have been implemented in 1941. It was replaced by Operation Shark. Again, the impression is that Sealion was issued in 1940 and was the German plan of invasion throughout the Second World War. This is abundantly clear that this is not the case, and this is something to look into. So just to kind of give a bit more detail on this, here's a source of information for this if you want to chase this up. So yeah, so you have several transport flotters or convoys which would have set sail from various ports in occupied Europe, and these would have seen the landing of various divisions and Gebirgsjäger on the south coast in a limited area. But yeah, it's something that warrants a bit more attention, especially when we're trying to assess the invasion threat, especially in 1941, by which time the Home Forces had time to reconsolidate their defences built in 1940 and start to put more effort into defending the coastline and have better weapons available to them, for example. So finally, we have something that deserves an honourable mention, but is a bit of a mystery to me. So we have Unternehmen Grün, or Operation Green. And this was, yeah, it's a bit of a mystery because I can't translate the associated documents and there's no bloody maps available in the original documents. But this was an additional, possibly diversionary, it's not 100% clear, plan to invade the neutral Republic of Ireland. And this is something that the Home Forces had preempted. When this would have been carried out, whether this would have happened alongside Sealion or Herst Riser is absolutely unclear to me. I can't work it out, but it's worth a mention. So if you want to have a look at the documents, have a look at the source provided here. If you want to translate those, I'm very interested in hear about this. So yeah, I've mentioned Operation Green is all coming very useful later on in terms of the Germans' plan, but it's a bit of a mystery and I've not had a chance to go into much detail with this. Right. That's nicely coming at half an hour, which is pretty good. So I think that's enough for one day. As always, I hope you found that useful. As I stated at the start, I hope that this has set Sealion in its context and sets the context for my future videos on the Home Forces, which are much more interesting and I can go into more detail about because all the records are in English. But hopefully this has shown you as well that the invasion threats as they were perceived by the Home Forces had, as we'll see in the future, much more basis in reality. I know this, helps to avoid the often instant dismissal and comments that this would have never happened that I often get online. Obviously, we know the Germans never invaded in hindsight, but I think it's worth setting their plans out based on primary sources rather than secondary sources and hearsay. And it's worth doing, as this will help me to compare and contrast their plans with those of the Home Forces later on. As I also stated earlier, I'm by no means an expert on the losing side. Sorry, I mean the German military in the Second World War. And however it may, no, sorry, if you are, then I'd love to have a chat with you as I have some questions of my own which I'd like to discuss with someone who does have this knowledge and does have the experience in that area. I think it would be worth as well having a chat with my mate Nick Budd as well. I'll drop him a message and see if he's interested in having a chat about this because he's much more knowledgeable on the German side of things. A huge day. So yeah, Nick, if you're watching, mate, I'll be in touch, and I think it'd be worth us having a little chat on video just to discuss these things here. So again, as always, finally, I hope you found this useful. If you like my content, then where are we? Shameless plug time. If you like my content, then please do check out my Patreon. Where I'll be posting my videos in advance before they go out on YouTube by about a week or so. By becoming a Patreon, you can help fund my documentary research, in particular in East Yorkshire, but also help fund my content in these videos that I do. If you don't want to become a Patreon, which is fair enough, you don't have to, then please do consider donating via Ko-Fi. Again, the money helps, the received helps me to continue my research into East Yorkshire and elsewhere, and allows me to, share my knowledge of this period because I make these videos in my spare time. I don't and never have wanted to be compensated financially for making these videos. It's more about me sharing my knowledge to people and making the history much more accessible and better understood. And if I get a bit of money to do this, it's always welcome and helps me to put a bit more time into this because, like I say, I work full time. I do these videos in my spare time, and getting a bit of money coming in helps me put a bit more time and effort into source of information. So it's always grateful to receive, but not essential to what I do. I'm very happy with just getting comments saying that people like the work I'm doing and find it useful and things like that. So yeah, hopefully that's useful. I'm more intent on making people aware that the history of the invasion threats to the UK is still largely to be written and largely shrouded in myth. So as always, I hope you found that interesting yet again. Thank you for watching and goodbye. I'll see you later.